Hello again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Wednesday's edition of Alaska Weather, first day of September 2021. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, hosting today's show. And up first, we've got get the cursor on the right screen there, no hazardous weather warnings, watches, or advisories around the state again tonight, tomorrow, and probably for the next couple of days. For the foreseeable future, no big storms expected to hit anywhere in the state. Certainly no flooding or high winds expected. And from there, just go right to satellite imagery. You can see the next system. First one, band of clouds there across southern Alaska. That was the first one that came in, brought some rain, and weakening now just south of the Alaska Range there, and brought heaviest rain. Kodiak Island, southwest part of the state, where they received over 2 inches in the last 12 hours, and some of that also from the system approaching now from the south, and also moisture streaming northward, beginning to reach the North Gulf Coast, almost catching up to the one that's stalling out over the southern interior there. But clouds on the increase there along the southeast coast, and rain really not making landfall on the North Gulf Coast yet. Some light amounts, leftover stuff from the original one that's pushing northward there. Cordova and let's see, Valdez had a little bit of light precipitation. Otherwise, heaviest amounts again, Kodiak Island and Homer, seeing winds gusting close to 40 miles an hour out of the northeast, and even stronger winds from Kamishak Bay down across the Barren Islands of 50 to 55 miles an hour, and continuing to increase throughout the afternoon today as that next system approaches. Otherwise, rainfall amounts, southwest part of the state, heaviest rainfall amounts there with Port Heiden, Agagik picking up about 4/10 of an inch of precipitation, but Dillingham only 1/100th. And then up to the north, band of moisture there from, let's see, the northwest coast, across Kotzebue, and streaming northeastward there to the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Ever kind of a narrow band of wetting rains, about 1/10 of an inch falling at Kotzebue and Kiana, and then lighter amounts off to the northeast. Otherwise, low pressure out toward the Pribilofs, weakening as it moves westward to the north of St. Paul Island, and not much going on in the Aleutians. There's a patch of showers there to the north of Atka Island. Otherwise, not a bad day. Mostly cloudy skies out toward the western areas, but also a few breaks in the overcast out that way. On the chart, there's that front, next front pushing northward there and tightening the gradient up and increasing the winds from the North Gulf Coast. In fact, storm warnings are out for tonight for the, I believe, the Barren Islands tonight, and possibly Kamishak Bay. But anyway, we've got clouds, ridge high pressure right over the Panhandle today. Still a nice day there, and very nice conditions north of the Alaska Range. Actually, partly sunny, Copper River Basin. Temperatures into the 70s, well into the 70s, mid to upper 70s over toward Delta Junction today, and all the way up in the Yukon Flats. Very nice 60s to mid 70s, and that extends right on down the Yukon River into the lower Yukon River area there. And then you start picking up the clouds over the Yukon Delta. South of there, pick up the rain as you head down across the Kuskokwim Delta in toward Togiak. Otherwise, just scattered showers there from the Seward Peninsula northeastward, again across the Kobuk Valley, Selawik Valley area, and to the Central Brooks Range. Forecast for tonight, front, again, storm warnings, North Gulf Coast, and I believe the Barren Islands, or gale warnings for the North Gulf Coast. And rain increasing, spreading eastward, getting kind of heavy there for the eastern North Gulf Coast, and increasing for the Panhandle, even down along the Prince of Wales Island coastline. Southern Alaska stays pretty wet, variably cloudy up over the interior. And the outlook for Thursday, that front still kind of slowing down but weakening, so winds won't be as strong. Rain possibly moderate at times for the eastern North Gulf Coast. And just showers over the inside waters of the Panhandle with light rain along the coast. Dry northern central interior again to the Arctic coast. And the outlook for Friday, periods of rain, southern Alaska, including the Panhandle, cloudier and cooler over the interior with dry conditions persisting over the North Slope. Lows in the lower to mid 50s for the Panhandle, otherwise upper 40s and lower 50s, southern Alaska there. Highs upper 50s to lower 60s, maybe mid 60s Copper River Basin, 55 to 62 for the southeast coast. Lows in the lower 50s again for the Panhandle, and upper 40s to lower 50s, Kodiak Island to the Susitna Valley. Highs on Friday in the lower 60s there for the Susitna Valley and McGrath-Nikolai area, as well as the Copper River Basin, and 55 to 60 Kenai Peninsula, South Central Alaska, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, also the Panhandle. Lows tonight, Arctic coast, mid to upper 30s there, same for the North Slope, and then the highs tomorrow near 70 again, but a little cooler, but still pushing towards 70 there around Fairbanks. And then lows back down into the lower 30s for the Arctic coast areas of the North Slope, otherwise 40s to near 50 south of the Brooks Range. Highs again pushing 70, may not make it, but still a nice day there at Fairbanks and much of the interior. And southwest areas, lows in the 50s, upper 40s for the Bering Sea, followed by highs upper 50s to lower 60s over the southwest interior, otherwise 50s for Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, maybe 57 for Adak, followed by lows in the upper 40s, and then the highs for Friday afternoon out that way, not much lower, not much higher than the lows, 50s over the Bering Sea, 55 to 60 for the inland areas.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Our central eastern Arctic coast, about Wainwright on eastward, and then south of the Brooks Range, VFR, all the way down to the Alaska Range into the northern Susitna Valley. Marginal VFR, though, for the Copper River Basin, IFR North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, on down the coastal areas of the Panhandle, marginal VFR into the inside waters, and IFR Kodiak Island, southern Cook Inlet, southern Kenai Peninsula, Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, north shore of Unalaska Island, across the Pribilofs into the southwest coast, and marginal for the area from Unmak Island westward to the Komodorskis. Marginal VFR St. Lawrence Island through the Bering Strait, but VFR for the northwest coast. And for the afternoon, Thursday, IFR, much of the Arctic coast now, marginal VFR down to the crest of the Brooks Range, but south of the mountains again staying VFR, all the way down to the Alaska Range and into the northern Kuskokwim Valley, and most of Norton Sound. But IFR across southern Alaska, as you can see from Bristol Bay on up into the at least the central Kuskokwim Valley, and again to about the Forelands, maybe a little to the north in Cook Inlet, North Gulf Coast, along the coast of the Panhandle, but covering Lynn Canal, including Haines and Skagway, and northern Kodiak Island, roughly from about Pasagchak, northward across Fognak Island, of course into the Seward Peninsula, all IFR, eastern Bering IFR, St. Lawrence Island, marginal VFR for the Aleutians. And for the day Friday, morning hours, band of IFR there through the north central interior, south of the central Brooks Range, across the Kobuk-Koyukuk Valley area, and staying to the north of the Yukon River though, where it's marginal VFR. And then to the west, some VFR. To the east and southeast, some VFR. Still lingering IFR. Actually, a little farther north now in Cook Inlet, covering the Kenai Peninsula into at least Girdwood and Whittier, Portage, Prince William Sound, all of the North Gulf Coast, all of the Panhandle now, much of the eastern southeast Bering Sea, north shores of the Fox Islands, Alaska Peninsula, and a little bit of IFR there for Amchitka Island, just west of Adak, and the Arctic coast still IFR. And for Friday afternoon, western Arctic coast now IFR, and the east side marginal, and marginal VFR along the south slopes of the Brooks Range, IFR, western Brooks Range, southward across Seward Peninsula, looks like catching Selawik, definitely Selawik, possibly Kotzebue, and marginal VFR for much of the Bering Sea. A couple of zones of IFR out there, one over the Pribilofs, extending into the southwest coast and interior, mostly the Kuskokwim Delta to the Kuskokwim Mountains, and the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula and Alaska Island, IFR, Cook Inlet, North Gulf Coast, Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, marginal VFR, all the way down to Dixon Entrance, marginal now for Kodiak Island and Bristol Bay, but VFR, Eastern Interior, north of the Alaska Range. And Atuvik and Adigan, both marginal tomorrow. Look for kind of a marginal day, either entrance. Lake Clark and Merrill, lowest conditions on the eastern entrances, possibly IFR. A little better out to the west. Rainy, marginal VFR at times. Most of the time, actually, marginal for rainy. And for windy, possible marginal VFR, maybe on the southern entrance, otherwise staying VFR. Optimistically, Isabel, lowest conditions will be on the southern entrance, could be marginal at that. And Mentesta, same thing, but even a lesser chance of marginal VFR on the south side there. So looking pretty good for Mentesta. Tonita, marginal VFR trending toward VFR into the afternoon, but Portage, IFR eastern entrance, otherwise marginal. And Chilkoot and White, IFR. Freezing levels 2,000 to 6,000 feet, quite a gradient up there with the Arctic jet along the Arctic coast. Otherwise 8,000 to 10,000 feet, central southern Alaska into the Aleutians and the Panhandle. Icing, moisture up into the North Gulf Coast with south-southeast flow, so could be some considerable moderate rime icing. Fognak Island, Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, maybe the western Alaska Range, and around Yakutat, maybe the southern Panhandle. And for the jet stream, strong southerly flow, 75 knots there into the eastern North Gulf Coast, across the northern Panhandle, 55 knots just catching the eastern Aleutians, 65 knots though off the eastern Arctic coast, but different story at 9,000 feet, pretty light winds up there. Southerlies 40 to 50 knots into the Copper River Basin, North Gulf Coast, 35 knots for the Panhandle, westerlies 30 across Kodiak Island, and 3,000 feet, 40 knot winds there, southern southeast coast, 30 to 35, North Gulf Coast, westerlies 25 to 35 for the north slope, easterlies, resulting in moderate chop in areas along the Brooks Range in the western Arctic coast, North Gulf Coast.
When I first started working here in the early 90s, this is where the glacier was. I mean, where we're walking right now would have been a pile of gravel that had been pushed up by the glacier, and then we would have had 100 to 200 foot high cliffs of ice right here. And as you can see, that's changed quite a bit. And if you look at that in 2 dimensions, you can sort of see the terminus used to be here, now it's back there. That gives you one measure. What that kind of 2-dimensional look doesn't show is how much mass has been lost, that the glacier has just sort of deflated. These 200-foot cliffs of ice have disappeared and pulled back to this gentle sloping glacier you see now.
When I was working in Kenai Fjords National Park, I used the topographic maps to navigate where I was, and I realized that the mapping of the glaciers was really off. The glaciers had receded a lot. There were new rivers and lakes that were establishing where the ice used to be or should have been according to the maps. And so then I did a study on this and found out that we had a 5% loss of glacier ice mass in the Kenai Fjords area between 1950 and 1985. Big change.
You know, one of the most compelling things we do, though, to document glacier change is simply take photographs. We've had repeat photography projects here at the park. They may not give you the most accurate data in terms of how much mass or real specific measurements, but what they do give you is a visual representation that can't be argued with. I mean, it really requires no interpretation.
Understanding what's happening, understanding these processes, and possibly being able to predict what's going to happen in the future is the best that we can do, and that requires science and research.
There's considerable research on climate change in Alaska. The most significant, I would say right now, is the Natural Resources Inventory and Monitoring Program, which is looking at change across a wide variety of vital signs or indicators.
Kenai Fjords National Park is actually a pretty good representation of what's going on globally with regards to glacier ice retreat. There have been studies showing that mountain glaciers are retreating all over the planet. There are probably well over 90% of the glaciers are in retreat status. There are a few that are advancing and some are holding their terminus point. But at Kenai Fjords, the tidewater glaciers are retreating more dramatically, but even the land-based glaciers in the terminus positions are retreating. It's pretty common for all the mountain glaciers. The big mountain glaciers in Wrangell St. Elias National Park, they're mostly in retreat too. We're really entering an interesting phase where what we call the cryosphere, the ice on the planet, is melting.
You know, in the more immediate past, it's clear that since the Pleistocene, glaciers have been retreating. So the idea that glaciers retreat is nothing, is no revelation. They've been retreating from across North America for the last 10,000 years. What appears to have changed and what has people's attention is the rate at which they're retreating. In the case of Exit Glacier, you know, we have scientists who've been looking at it. We have evidence that the glaciers left behind, where we can track that retreat for about the last 200 years. And we can say with confidence that in the last decade, that rate has increased.
Terminus mapping is a great way to map a small portion of the ice field. We come out twice a year and we use a GPS to walk the edge of the terminus and map the farthest extent of Exit Glacier. And that allows us to see what type of changes are occurring over the winter accumulation period and the summer ablation period. With that data, that can help us as we witness these changes within the ice field. We can hopefully be able to correlate that with the weather data that we have.
You know, when you look at an ice field that's 750 square miles, when you look at a glacier that towers hundreds of feet high, you get a sense of permanence. You think these things are massive, they're somehow a permanent sort of feature, and yet in a very short period of time, in a matter of a couple of decades, we've seen dramatic change in those things.
At Exit Glacier, we have a time-lapse camera set up on the glacier that allows us to take a couple photos every single day, and then to put that sequence of photos into a video where we can see changes of the glacier and the vegetation phenology throughout an entire year.
Virtually all the glaciers in Alaska are receding. Some glaciers are moving forward. That's not an indication that they're actually growing in size. It's just the rate at which they're slipping down the mountain.
In some cases, some of these glaciers are receding back up onto land, and so they're producing less ice. When you change the glacier systems, you're changing habitat for marine mammals and other wildlife. And the populations of harbor seals have dropped dramatically in the fjords. In 1980, shortly after the establishment of the park, in Island Bay, we had maybe 1,500 harbor seals. Nowadays, you know, it's a few hundred.
In Arctic environments, much of the sunlight that reaches the Earth bounces back because it hits snow and reflects off into space, or ice on the ocean and reflects off into space. That's the albedo effect. When the snow thaws and instead you have rock or vegetation, or when the ice thaws and you have transparent ocean, the sunlight will convert to other wavelengths. It'll convert essentially to warmth. That does not bounce back into the atmosphere as much. So consequently, you get a warming of the ocean, you get a warming of the ground, you get a thawing of frozen soils or permafrost, you get a more rapid thawing of sea ice. So once the ice and once the snow is off of the surface, the rate of warming increases considerably.
If you're driving out to Exit Glacier, you'll actually start to see signs along the side of the road that have dates on them. Visitors sometimes are confused. They think they're elevations or something until they get up to the glacier and realize, oh, those were all date signs along the road that were telling me when the glacier was there. Another thing that's been happening in the Exit Glacier area in recent years is this flooding that comes at a time we're not used to. We're used to having maybe some flooding in the fall when we have a lot of heavy rain. This has suddenly been some flooding that's coming in the middle of the summer, usually not associated with precipitation events. It's associated with warmer weather and melting. When you walk down one of our trails that leads to Exit Glacier, there are a number of ways to get out there, but what used to be the main route is no longer really the main route because of the way the glacier has changed. So So this main route to the glacier used to provide dramatic views of the glacier as you walk towards it. In fact, there was a large kiosk built at the end of this trail for people to stop and rest and enjoy the view of the glacier. Now, if they stop and rest at this kiosk, people think, why did the park put a kiosk here? Because it looks out at some shrubs. Hey, there's no glacier within view anymore.
The way we solve big problems like this is not all at once. There's a thing called the Sokolov's wedges, and you just take a little bite of the pie, one sliver at a time. So we try to do incremental changes.
When we talk to people about our concerns about climate change, about the changes that are happening to the glacier, we also want to leave them with some idea of what we're doing to mitigate some of the effects of climate change. For example, here at the park, as we retire vehicles out of our fleet, we try to replace them with electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. We've done things like at the AKwx Nature Center, helping to sort of experiment and install a cutting-edge fuel cell as opposed to running some traditional power source out there that relies on some sort of more greenhouse-producing gas.
My main hope for the future is that people get the message that the planet is changing fairly rapidly in places, particularly places like Kenai Fjords National Park, and that it is, we think, there's good evidence it's a result of atmospheric changes which are measured in terms of human inputs into the atmosphere.
The rapid rate at which these glaciers are changing now offers us the opportunity to talk about this place as a way of looking into the future. In a lot of parts of the country, climate change issues are a little more subtle, and we can point here and say, look how fast this is changing. This is what the future holds for perhaps a lot of us and a lot of the planet as climate continues to change.
I'm optimistic that people and nature will adapt to change, but my expectation is that change will occur. Time will tell.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Well, we've got gale warnings for the eastern North Gulf Coast tomorrow. East-southeast winds there, 35 to 40 knots. Gale warnings also for the north coast of the Panhandle, southeast 35 knots. And small craft advisories for the southern coast. Southeast winds 25 to 30 knots there, seas around 10 feet. Central southern inner channels, southeast winds 20 knots, 4-foot seas. A little lighter there at Lynn Canal, southeast at 20. Southeast 15. And then for Friday, southeast 10 knots for Lynn Canal, variable 15 Stevens Passage, southeast 15 for Clarence Strait. Winds down now along the coastline there, south or southeast at about 15 knots with 6-foot seas. And Prince William Sound tomorrow, gale warnings out, east winds 35 knots, 7-foot seas. Small craft advisories for the Middleton Island area. Southeast winds 25 knots there with 11-foot seas, east 30 knots. Almost a gale, but not quite, or actually coming down to 30 knots out of the east for the western North Gulf Coast. Barren Islands north at 20 knots, 11-foot seas. Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, small craft advisories. North winds 30 knots with seas around 12 feet, but north of the Forelands, 25-knot winds with 7-foot seas. And for Friday, really laying down Cook Inlet, variable to north at 10 knots, seas coming down to 2 feet. East at 15 for Kamishak Bay, Barren Islands, southeast 15 knots, seas 3 to 5 feet. Light variable winds for the western North Gulf Coast and the eastern North Gulf Coast, southeast at 15, east 15 for Prince William Sound. Shelikof Strait, north winds tomorrow at 20 knots with 6-foot seas, southwest 20 knots for the east side of Kodiak Island. And for the Alaska Peninsula, winds looking southwest 15 to 20 knots with 3 to 6-foot seas. And Bristol Bay, south winds 15 knots with 1-foot sea heights. And then for Friday, Bristol Bay, light winds from the southwest, only 10 knots and slight seas continue. Let's see, the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, northwest winds 20 knots with 6-foot seas. Otherwise, west winds 15 knots there for the Bering Sea side of the peninsula, all the way up to Sitkinak, Kodiak Island, and light variable winds for Shelikof Strait, otherwise southwest 15 there on the east side. And for Unalaska Island, west winds tomorrow 20 to 25 knots, 5 to 6 foot seas. Unmac Island, westerlies 15 to 20 knots, seas around 5 feet, and variable to southwest breezes for Adak and Atka, 10 to 15 knots, 2 to 4 foot seas there, west 15, Chitka Island, northwest 20, Kiska to Shemya. And for Friday, northwest 15, Shemya to Kiska, Chitka Island, west at 20, light west breeze for the central Aleutians, 15 knots. Same thing for Unmac Island, Unalaska Island, maybe northwest at 20 with 6 foot seas. And south of Nunivak Island along the coast there, 15 knot variable winds tomorrow with 4 foot seas, light northwesterlies at 10 knots for the Pribilofs, northeast 20 for St. Matthew Island, and the Yukon Delta coast north at 20. Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, north winds at 15 knots. Friday, Norton Sound north at 10, northwest 20 knot winds in the forecast for the northern Bering Sea, including St. Lawrence Island along the Yukon Delta coast and the Pribilof Islands. Northwest 15 there for the Kuskokwim Delta coastline with 3 foot seas. Arctic coast east side, northeast 20 knots tomorrow, seas 4 feet, east at 20 for the central coast, small craft advisories. East winds, east to northeast winds 25 to 30 knots there all the way down to Cape Thompson, but Cape Thompson to Wales, northeast of 15. And for Friday, even stronger winds there. Now small craft advisories all along the Arctic coast. 30 knots sustained out of the east with 8 foot seas there for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. About 25 knots from the east central coast. Back up to 30 knots on the west side. And from Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, northeast 25. Northwest 20 from Cape Thompson to Wales. For tonight, dry up that way, maybe a lingering shower possible, but don't count on it for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Dry over much of the interior, wet southern Alaska from Bristol Bay, actually the southeast Bering Sea eastward with the heaviest precipitation, North Gulf Coast, starting to show up on the Panhandle. And storm warnings tonight for the Barren Islands and good gales for the North Gulf Coast, but those weaken tomorrow afternoon, coming back down to small crafts. Rain continues, but starts to lighten up. And kind of cloudy and wet for the Panhandle, but nice over the central and northern interior, all the way up to the Arctic coast, and unsettled over the Bering Sea. And that continues into Friday, kind of unsettled southeast Bering Sea with a trough, wetter and cooler central interior, still wet and cool over southern Alaska and the Panhandle.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.